the Chase Thomas Podcast, for people who have nothing but time to kill.
So I think if they just move the academic calendar back, that could go a long way in kind of, easing some of this chaos we have in the sport in December and January.
No, absolutely. Matt Green, Dog Bites, UGA. What's going on this week?
Yes, sir. So we talked a lot about the combine a week ago, but I feel like we mainly focused on the offensive side of the ball with Brock Bowers, Amarius Mims, Ladd McConkey. I think it's because there wasn't a lot to talk about when it comes to the defensive side of the ball for Georgia. The only four guys they had at the combine were the three defensive backs, Kamari Lassiter, Javon Bullard, Tyke Smith, and then Zion Logue, the only defensive lineman. And it just got me thinking, like, this Georgia defense, we kind of see Georgia, it feels like they kind of ebb and flow. Like, there's years they are heavy offense, and there's years they're heavy defense. And this past year was a year where they were really an offensive team. And I think that kind of overshadowed kind of how flawed this defense was a year ago. Like, I would say, you look at Georgia's defense of the last, 5-6 years, like, this was 2023 was probably Georgia's worst defense since 2018. I would say it's the most points they've allowed since the 2020 team, but it was the first year they had allowed over 100 yards rushing per game since 2018. So the defense is going to have to step up next year, but in like typical Georgia fashion, like, they're only losing like four real key players from their team a year ago, other than Jamon Dumas-Johnson transferring to Kentucky. But I think a lot of Georgia fans are kind of confident of what they have at that inside linebacker position. But you look at like what they've been the last few years, like, they've been middle of the road in sacks. I think 2020 is kind of the lost Georgia team. Like, I think Jake Fromm made an absolute awful career decision not coming back for his senior year at Georgia, because that team was absolutely loaded. That was the last time Georgia had a true, like, elite edge rusher with Azeez Ojulari, and even Adam Anderson was coming on at that time. Like, that team was top 3 in the SEC in sacks that year. There was just awful quarterback play. And so the season is just remembered as an absolute failure. But that loaded 2021 defense that had all those first round picks, like, all of those guys were on the 2020 team, including a guy like Azeez Ojulari. So I think it's you look at 2020 and 2021. 2021, they're also second in the SEC in sacks. So both of those teams had elite pass rushes. Basically, every other year, Georgia's been middle of the road in terms of actually sacking the quarterback. So I think, with what they bring back, this was not one of their best defenses in 2023, but I think with how much they're bringing back, I think you could see a big improvement in 2024.
When you say improvement, like, how much better? Like, where do you think? Because last year, I think what was different about this Georgia defense was you didn't have the Jordan Davis, you didn't have the Jalen Carter in the middle just wreaking havoc. It wasn't really the pass rush this past year. It was different with where Georgia was extremely effective in stymieing opposing offenses. It was the secondary. Obviously, really elite safety play. Obviously, they're always going to have elite linebackers. Chris Cole, I think, is going to be really good. Tennessee was down there to the wire. That kid is going to be really, really good. 4-star out of Virginia. I think he'll see the field sooner rather than later at Georgia. But I mean, you're just loaded in that front. But what's going to be different? Do you think it's still going to be very secondary linebacker heavy, or do you think we'll see more of those kind of freaks in the front seven that wreaked havoc like they did 2 years ago?
They definitely don't have those freaks on the defensive line. And I'm afraid they're never going to have those freaks on the defensive line again. I think Georgia fans might need to get used to, like, Jordan Davis and Jalen Carter might be like the two best they like ever have. But that's not to say that Georgia isn't going to have a bunch of good bodies on the defensive line. Like, Mykel Williams is a potential first round pick. Like, he's not that true, like, edge rusher, just pass rusher. He's just kind of that hybrid, honestly, kind of more of a 4-3 traditionally defensive end. Like, but he plays obviously with his hand in the ground most of the time. But I think Mykel Williams is a potential star. Malachi Starks is a superstar in the secondary. So the secondary obviously loses a lot. And Dalen Everett, one of the only 2 starters that's back, like he got picked on a lot a year ago. So I think that it could be a worry, other than the fact that you got Kirby Smart and now you're bringing in Tavares Robinson. Like Georgia's secondary is like, it can only worry you so much. I kind of feel like it's not going to be as good as 2023 in my opinion, because I think Javon Bullard is one of the best defensive backs I think I've ever seen play at Georgia. Honestly, like the way that man just had a nose for the ball, he would hit, he would just always be in the area. Like you don't make a lot of like undersized guys that just have that chip on their shoulder. Like he just had a nose for the ball. So Javon Bullard, I think, is going to be a big loss. But just with the way this Georgia team recruits, like Jonel Aguero is probably a guy that's going to step in, a former 5-star. It's like KJ Bolden, who knows, a true freshman who could step in. You just tend to trust that Georgia is going to have a certain level on the defensive side of the ball. And the fact that this was their first year where they gave up over 100 yards a game on the ground in like 5-6 years, like I think that's also going to put a chip on this team's shoulder. Like that's not the Georgia standard. Like you've seen Georgia the last 2-3 years make teams one-dimensional. Like they gave up 13 rushing touchdowns a year ago. They gave up 19 from 2019 to 2022 combined. Like in 4 seasons, they gave up 19 and they gave up 13 a year ago. So that's just not what you're used to seeing from a Georgia defense. And it's, you got Nazir Stackhouse back. You got, some of these guys, Jordan Hall, that like were big time prospects that like, maybe this is the year they step in to a bigger role.
And then Pimba,
Christian Miller. Yeah, Samuel Mpemba was a big time recruit. So there's so many big time recruits. Jalen Walker is a guy that's my biggest criticism of the SEC championship was I think Jalen Walker should have played about 4 times as many snaps as he did in that game. Like he was the one like linebacker, and he's in such a weird role because he's an inside linebacker, I guess, like by trait, but just to get him on the field, they just put him at outside linebacker and he just makes things happen. He just gets after the quarterback. I think he had 4 or 5 sacks a year ago and he hardly played. So I think Jalen Walker could be just a disruptor next year. And if he can be that breakout guy, maybe he's used more like a Channing Tindall, that he is an inside linebacker, but he gets after the passer as well. So I think just with how Georgia recruits and, with the fact that they're bringing so much back from the team a year ago, I trust that we're not going to see Georgia be giving up rushing yards like they were last season.
Malachi started as a freshman against Oregon, right? In the opener?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if he literally started, but I mean, he was playing starter minutes that game.
I wonder, I mean, it wouldn't be outrageous to see KJ Bolden start right away for Georgia, right? I mean,
no, definitely not. And I didn't even mention Ellis Robinson. Like that's like some people as the number 1 player in the country, like if corner is a weakness for Georgia, and Julian Humphrey, he played well at times and had some injuries he had to deal with a year ago, but he was a big time recruit too. But there's a chance some dudes just get on the field and they're different, like a Malachi Starks, like you're talking about. Like that was a potential uncertainty, like how you going to replace that safety spot with Lewis Seen that on that championship team, and you get a guy who's another future first-round pick and a guy that was ready from day one. So some guys are just ready from day one. I don't think Georgia's going to like sit here in March relying on any true freshman to be a game changer for them to be like the preseason number 1 team. I think they could win a national championship without having a freshman become like an impact player. But if one of these freshmen does emerge as an impact player, that just sets them off even more.
I like it. Matt Green, SEC 2023 schedule review series continues on, my friend. We did Florida last week. I want to get your perspective here, Matt Green. Tennessee, 8-4 after it's all said and done. 9-4 when you include the bowl win over Iowa in the Citrus Bowl. Sir, what say you about the 2023 season for the Tennessee Volunteers with how the season ultimately unfolded when you look at how the schedule came out for them based on how the opponents finished out this past year? Was it about right based on expectations, based on personnel? Did they underachieve? Did they maybe overachieve a little bit based on what we saw from this Tennessee team all year long? What say you, Matt Green?
So there's a couple different ways to dissect this, because preseason number 12, I would say without a doubt.
Nicely done, nephew. The Chase Thomas podcast. Hell yeah.